So, welcome. I'm Eric. Like Paul mentioned, I think most of you, almost all of you, have met me at some point. I haven't looked at the presenter list yet, but I saw a lot of familiar names in there. Paul, feel free to unmute anybody you want to heckle me. But yeah, I'm gonna here today to talk to you about some file I/O stuff that I've learned in my couple of years of experience here at Configure. I've been here for 5-6 years. If you didn't know that, I've worked in every industry that we're part of, been part of too many projects to remember at this point. Um, so yeah, heckle, heckle, heckle. Hey, Matt, how's it going? All right. So kicking us off here. A couple topics that I'm going to be focusing on today because this is a really wide arena. I'm pretty sure somebody given enough time could probably present for 8 hours straight on the different ways in which you can work here in CT, file operations and stuff like that. So, all right. So, topic one is going to be kind of centered around some helpful helper functions that allow us to do some neat stuff, just super trivially with very little code on your side. The next area, which I think will be of interest to many people, and both these areas have come up for me recently in projects, is working with our Office package and reading and writing data to and from an Excel file. I guess, Paul, you mentioned that you'd rely on the presenter for the whether they wanted questions immediately or at the end. Go ahead and interrupt me whenever. Doesn't matter. I like interruptions. I have no issues with that. So, plus, I think we have plenty of time. My presentation's been timing, depending on how rambly I get, between 30 and 40 minutes initially. So, if you have questions, we got time to talk. So, ponder this question for a minute. Have you ever wanted to save or load an object and its state to or from a file? Maybe you might think drawing here or favorite at this point, but even more kind of granular than that, just any object in CET and you want to save it. Might seem weird, but believe it or not, this can come in helpful, useful. There's a few areas that you might be surprised to even know that are using stuff like this. And I'll show you those as we get there. So to start off, this package here, CMIO, in this file, easy.cm, is the source of the first two functions that I'd like to call attention to. And these are quite powerful functions: easy save and easy load. And both these are very simple to use. They take an object and a URL, and they'll either stream it to disk or load it from disk for you and give it back to you in code for you to work with. And it takes that object in the state that it is at that time. So anything that's been done to it is saved. So, uses that you might think about using this, and I can talk about one concrete use, at least on the platform itself now, but I encountered a situation where I needed to generate beam profiles, and that generation came from a text file. Well, that takes a lot of time to process every single time if you're going to do that every time you start. It was much faster to basically run an import, build that structure in memory, and then from that point forward, it doesn't change ever. These are steel beams that have been standard for 50 years, probably more than that actually. But I just saved it to disk and as an object and load it. Much faster. No need to process that anymore, and it's reusable. So that's one scenario. You might find yourself thinking about something like this. Something else, maybe you've got something that needs to be obfuscated a little bit on disk. You don't want to be saving it just as a plain text readable file. This is something you can do to do this. This isn't encryption by any means or anything like that. It's not foolproof, but it is a layer of obfuscation that could be helpful to prevent nosy people on their hard drives. So along with those, you're going to find they don't quite have everything you need. And so there's some additional common dialogue functions that become pretty helpful when doing operations with these two functions. So the first one, and some of you may know about these already or not, but get open file name. This is very useful, and it presents and builds a dialogue for the user to get the file name. You can supply the filter and the suffix for it, and a few other parameters. Same version for the save. Again, pops open a dialog for the user for them to tell you where something's going to be saved at. I show this one because I make use of this in one of my functions, so thought it makes sense. There's quite a few other functions within this file. Actually, I'll show you those right now. I figured it'd be worth it. Actually, before we go there, we're on the file, another file that I was going to show you here. So in order to demonstrate this, I needed to have a simple object and snapper case to work with here. So you should be seeing my code at this point. Hopefully it's big enough. Let me make it a little bigger. Sorry about the dark because it was a little too much finagling to, of course it's gonna go crazy. To turn off my dark themes here. If you can't read, somebody complain, please. This. So first thing, there's an object here, rando object. It's got a stir key, constructor that sets that key, and a very simple 3D return method. We're just gonna build some text in 3D, the size of the text we want in space, how thick we want that text, and the font we want to use. Apply a random material, we're good, move on with our day. And we have a simple, very simple, trivially simple snapper. It's got a thing field. We've got 3 properties. If you have any questions about these, speak up. But it's got a property to manipulate the text that's been saved on thing. We've got a button property to load, and we've got a button property to save. And both these things will be leveraging some of the code that I'm going to show you in a minute. Some additional code. So this snapper constructs itself and just creates a default object, and we pull our graphics from it. It's that simple. And I didn't add this to the library in the dev conference thing. Maybe I should have, but you insert it here. So that is the base that we're going to use to do some of this save and load of that field that's on that snapper. So the first function that I made, and it's really very simple. So we use that generic, oh wait, I forgot to show you guys some code that I wanted to show you in that commons file, that common dialogues file. I find this file interesting. It's got a lot of stuff in here. I'm gonna try and go through here as slowly as possible. I'm gonna page, but you got your open file helpers, a couple different versions. Here's one that'll open and give you multiple files from that folder. We have a save file. Continuing on, there's a couple of manipulators, helpers within this file for the filters. An overwrite warning dialog that can be used for you. Find existing parent in the root directory. Browse for a folder. So if you wanted to have the user direct you to a directory location rather than an actual file. Color dialogues. So lots of helpful stuff in here. I think that's it on this file. That's of note, but lots of helpful stuff in here. If you didn't know that was there, make use of it if you need. It's good. It saves you some time. All right. So back to this function that I created to save. So we're using the get save file name that I just showed you. We give it the app window as a parent. If you have a different parent window, make sure you're using that. Otherwise, your dialogues will pop up behind it. We give it a filter. Something noteworthy regarding this filter is that it has to be entered as text filter. So it's the user readable text in the filter followed by user readable text in the filter. You have to manually set the suffix. This, I don't know, I've been thinking about this one, whether it makes sense or not, because I kind of think I should be able to expect it here, but I'm going to talk to dev support about that one at some points. Easy save. And there's our save of the object to the location that we've asked the user for. And then we just notify the user of that save in this case. So back to my example. Let's go back to my random object. Place that snapper. All right, so in CT, you get a snapper with some text on it and some properties. Simple. I can come in here, modify my text. See, anybody who knows me should not be surprised by that. I love CET right there. And I got my buttons here. So we'll go ahead and save. Then navigate to my test file here. Give it a name. Rando1. Save. Here's my user warning. Here's where it was saved to. My random object and the key that was saved. I can prove it in inspector. Here we go, 171. There's my key. Not that there's any doubt, right? All right, so suppose I'm a user here again. I want that same thing back, but I'm way too lazy to type text in. Also too lazy to make a library button. So I'm gonna insert that back. Oh, crap. Load. Get my dialog again. Conference test. I've got my rando object file, rando text. So, boom. I love CET. And I guess I sped ahead a little too much here, but here's the load file. Not that there was much to go over here. It's quite simple. We already looked at every single thing that's done here. Just wrap in a function here and hand it, call it. So, yeah, see, I got ahead of myself in my demo here. So that's a good point. If there's any questions at this point, it's a good point to ask related to this. I can't see if there are or not, so.
Nothing yet.
Okay. All right, well, let's go a little bit farther here. Oh, I messed up that animation, that's right. So Excel, this is our friend, right? I think most of us have this, wonderful fondness for working with Excel. But we know that it's a reality sometimes. Often there are many factors to why, you're probably in Excel hell already if you're doing this, but we have to do it sometimes because often CET does sit in that spot where, we like to just play minion to something. That's an interesting question, Fong. I just looked at your question. I would not recommend that because I would suspect you're going to see some issues in your dialogue, your Windows handles for your dialogue and stuff like that. I think, Paul, would you have a better answer for this? You might know more about how the view clips here would play into being saved as an object.
So real quick, the question was, can you perform a save of view clips in paperspace? So you'd be saving out like a specific snapper. I think that'd be pretty dangerous simply because it's
Mm-hmm.
referring to, another
Mm-hmm.
space and
Yep.
probably referring to things within that space. So I think the save would get pretty messy. I'd be worried about dangling references and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, a good, just to cycle back a minute here. So I mentioned that there's functionality that we have, and yeah, typically you wouldn't use it in that type of scenario. Typically, it's a very custom scenario type use case when you need these, and this is a good example where this is actually used. Easy save and easy load is in the expector filters. That's all that's happening in the background is an object filter that is used to filter this view is saved off and reloaded. You know, and in my use cases in customizations, that's been true too. I've never tried to do it with something that already had, you know, systems kind of around it to handle the regeneration of that thing, or, you know, the saving of it through a drawing or snappers or something like that. So hopefully that's, here we go. All right, so back to Excel. So we have a package, CM Core MS Office. Inside of here, there's some support to work with Excel. You can, this link here is our guide on how this is working, I guess, under the hood. And then there's a link to which is also in the code, the Microsoft documentation and the API for Office. So you can, you know, make use of any of their interfaces that they make available. Inside of this package, you'll see examples for all of this in a very simple way, one that you would copy and just manipulate over. So I can show that real quick. Actually, I guess I hadn't really planned on it, but might as well. So a lot of customizations I've seen using this, something to note, they've ended up just copying this whole Excel object into their customization because there's not really much to it. There's a couple classes that go along with it, so it's easy to take control yourself then. I don't necessarily recommend it or not recommend that. I'm just saying I've seen that happen. It's got some helper interfaces for you to build and get sheets, save, get ranges, get use range, calculate, stuff like that. So the basics of what you would need are here. Towards the bottom are these examples that kind of show you a little bit of how to do some stuff with it. So cycling back to a little more applicable use case here, at least given our certain our current example. That's a good question too. We just got that help center going, so if not, Paul, I'll volunteer myself to go fill in with whatever this stuff is.
So real quick, the question was, is there a help center section for file I/O? If not, it would be great to have the basics in there. Yeah, we can probably push that along. We have been doing a lot of work on the help center recently, and like cleaning up old articles and adding new ones that we think are missing. So yeah, we can add that to the list.
I think you'd be very good too, yeah, because this is easy stuff that you really just don't come across. That's why we put it on the conference. So, and I'll eventually read that question before I just start answering it, Paul. I swear. All right, so here's this function that I just modified a little bit to do what I wanted it to do, and essentially, I pre-prepared an Excel file. Let's just look at that real fast. It's got a word in each cell. Simple, nothing to it. In this situation, I just want to open that up, and for every word that it finds, create a random snapper and set its key to that word. So you'll see that, you know, we're asking the user input here. in the way that I showed in the previous example. Excel app, you start it. In this case, I'm tracking a point because I'm just parking lot, making a park, or making actually more of like a run, a line of text. Get the used rank, get our first sheet, or get a sheet that we have. So this is actually cycling through all sheets. Get the used range and create things and insert them. Something else, make sure, notice, try finally, make sure you're always closing this. And I think the only exception here, where you would not be specifically closing your Excel app, is when you actually start it and make it visible for the user to deal with. So that is something that I have done. I've taken both approaches where we'll just export or read. I mean, in this case, we're reading it, so we need to close. There's nothing for the user to handle here. But when you're exporting, often you have that choice of just pushing it to a spot so they don't even really know, or they just know that it goes there, or building it and throwing it on their face and let them deal with it, which I kind of prefer because it gives the user an option to save it where they want to save it. So let's demonstrate this one in action. So back to, this is a file. And again, all this stuff is available in this conference repo. I already pushed it, I believe. So I'm gonna run this function here. And I gotta find my dialog, there it is. So in this case, I'm gonna find my Excel file. Let's go back to test, import. Okay, cool. Let's go back to CT. Look at that. Get all my random objects, each one a snapper with its stuff set up. All right. I guess any questions before we go on to saving or writing? Cool. So the next piece, often it's not just a pulling in of information, though that can be very helpful. It might be, you may involve pushing information to it. So save and export. You need a couple additional pieces here because it's not, you're not opening something from the user, right? So now in this case, this is a function that will just create a new workbook and give you an option to set it to be visible. When it creates that workbook, we're adding one sheet to it. That's what this is doing. And then it hands it back to whoever is calling this guy. Here is a function I wrote to add the thingies to the workbook. One thing of note here, notice there's a +1, and you index from A1 to whatever. This is something that I found interesting about this, is that you have to not count from 0. Thank you, some Microsoft programmer who did that. So I assume that at least is some Microsoft programmer, because it seems to be their API that forces this. Moving on, maybe. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay. What happened here? All right. So here's a function that is combining all of these things. We're going to ask the user for input of where to save it. Going to gather my random objects, add them to the sheet, save, close my app. So when I write this or run this, that's this one right here. Got a dialog that popped up for me. Sorry, presentations make this go a little crazy, but to save the Excel format, call this my rando1 Excel file, save. Cool. And I dumped all the different entries that I save along the way. Now And come back over here, open this up. They're all there. And you'll notice Excel didn't open, didn't flicker. You didn't know. Nobody knew that Excel was being used. So the next bit, very similar, but in this case, we're going to actually leave it open. So rather than not make it visible, we set open to true, do our stuff, save it, go from there. That file again. And now I have an open Excel file that I can save to wherever I want. So again, reminder, clean up your processes. If you haven't left it open for the user to deal with. I guess something else that was worth noting, I don't know if I mentioned it, and always, did anybody catch the use of temp URL here? This is a very, very handy helper for working with URLs. Creates you a quick temporary URL just in your right directory where you can do stuff. And if it fails, you just ignore it. It'll get cleaned up eventually. Otherwise, you can move it to where you want. So I find it to be kind of good practice to use that when dealing with URLs. Yes, Johan Lindholm says, never forget to close and dispose netobs. I have mentioned that one a couple times, but one thing to note is in this example, I'm actually opening the file for the user to deal with. So I leave it for them to close in that case. That's the only situation where I think it's acceptable to not close and dispose. So questions? More questions? Did anybody, how many people already knew this stuff? Yeah, I actually have that in a merge quest already going. Thanks for pointing that out. So Lindholm also points out that we have, could we get the fields to not be private in the Excel app and the workbook? Yeah, I have made that change already, but I haven't pushed it, but I'm going to submit it for merge as well because that seemed very problematic. Probably also why a lot of customizations end up copying that entire file into their folder, but it is pretty minimal, and sometimes it's still helpful to do that. So, but yeah.
Fong has a question. Sometimes there's a firewall to deal with.
That's interesting. So you're talking about over like a VPN connection, I'm assuming, and you're accessing network resources. Yeah, I haven't tested it in that scenario. I wouldn't expect it to behave any differently because we don't really treat those things that differently. I don't think it's just be slow. So your firewall could interfere if it felt like it, but I don't know. All right, Andrew, can we just ban private methods and functions in the base project while we're at it? Yeah, I know, right? That would be give us interfaces too. Yep, you can, yep. Yeah, I'll have to test that one. I don't recommend doing a lot of stuff like that. No. But as far as operations over VPN, we've seen, I've seen projects go through efforts to get away from that type of setup. I mean, it works, but it binds your CT to some sort of VPN connection too. So like that can be problematic if you're hitting users, and catalogs now with a lot of the functionality that sits within catalogs can often help distribute things that you might be accessing over VPN. Might be though, I get it. Sometimes you have no choice. So. Yep. Yep. I thought about doing that here, but I didn't want that in the presentation. Lindholm suggests a helpful way to get around private occasionally for fields specifically. Prop deaths are fun. Well, like I said, everything is in the repo. So yeah. If you need, if you have any questions, like I said, a lot of you already know me, so feel free to reach out. I think we're gonna definitely take Jerry's suggestion here and make sure this gets, if it's not already documented, get it documented in the help center because it'd be helpful, I think. All right. I'll give you guys 10 minutes back, I guess. Oh, I forgot my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for listening. Eric, thank you for showing us your terrible Emacs scheme.
It is awful, isn't it? It's really messed up right now too. I didn't want to mess up my stuff. So.